Esta conferencia comenzará a grabarse.
As I said, welcome everybody. Today we are going to focus our session on the disruptions in the social economy ecosystem. It's quite important to have you here because for us, for the industrial ecosystem, your site, your area is quite, at least for me, unknown. And I need to say that we don't have enough data, okay, at all. So we totally need you to understand what is happening and how can we integrate the social side, the social aspects in our study. Okay, not only in the study but also in the action and in the future collaboration between social and industrial clusters. This is not the first session about it at all, okay, but it will be the first methodological session on that study, on the study of the disruption. To start, we have with us three experts: Karel van der Porten from DigiGrow, Susan Huskis, and Thomas Vignal. I don't know in which order would you prefer to speak. I think Karel, you will be the first one.
Yeah, I can start to give a bit of frame, and then maybe Thomas can follow, and then Susanna.
Shall I give you the presentation rights?
I will not present. I will just
Perfect.
give a brief intro to not steal too much time from the other speakers, because that's more important. Just very briefly on the ecosystem, maybe some people joined that are not yet aware or not so much in this scope yet. In the recovery package, there was a certain emphasis on 14 industrial ecosystems for recovery. And one of these ecosystems is proximity and social economy ecosystem. And Antonio is daily with this ECA meeting or this European Alliance Against COVID-19. So here you see the list, wonderful. And on the left upper side, you see that we are very happy that proximity and social economy is also present. So it's described as social enterprises, associations, and cooperatives aiming at generating a social impact, often proximity based. Some people might ask why this word proximity is there. Because this ecosystem is not only populated by social economy actors stricto sensu. There is also a very strong emphasis on local business, and what is the common denominator of this is the fact that we want to target beyond social economy also businesses that are really rooted in the local area and the territory. In other words, they have no interest to delocalize, so to have their activities elsewhere because of cheaper labor or other pure economic reasons. I will give a very short introduction how we approach this analysis from the European Commission. It's important to know that this was an economic analysis, and this was also mainly focusing on heavily disrupted forms or heavily disrupted aspects within the economy. So, for example, within this ecosystem, we have seen that particularly the small businesses, so the small enterprises, the small social enterprises, small associations, which are not always full enterprises, might also be hybrid ones or public-private partnerships, and the cooperatives have suffered quite extensively, and this was much, let's say, leveraged, not leveraged, but we could somehow prove this by data from many stakeholders. one particular aspect within the social economy suffered even more, not even more, it's not like a contest of who suffered the most, but it was very remarkable that the sector of the social services had very specific issues, let me state it like that. And that is basically the reason why I invited somebody from the specific sector today. It's not a sector, but from this specific population, the social services. And on the other side, we have also Susanna, who has more an idea about what social enterprises are active in and can explain you how the social enterprises are working. Of course, they are not covering the whole social economy system. It's very important, and that's why we have invited in the past already Victor Messeger, for example, from Social Economy Europe, who gave already a good introduction in the world of social economy as a whole. We had also Reuse, for example, already present. He gave a very specific focus on circular activities within the social economy. We had Rafaela, for example, I think she just joined, by the way, who has a very beautiful cluster in Milano. We had Professor Calderini. So many people we have already seen in these morning meetings, but the next two speakers were not yet present. So I took the occasion to also invite them. And because they are very specifically linked to the disruptions that we highlighted in our social economy ecosystem. A last point I should raise on the ecosystem exercise, and which is very important, is that not everybody is captured within one ecosystem. So not the whole social economy is necessarily captured in the proximity and social economy system. Because of course, if you see tourism, we see retail, we see construction, digital health, agri-food, renewable, energy intensive, that might be doubtful, also mobility, but also electronics for a certain extent, definitely textiles, aerospace and defense, not so much, but also definitely creative cultural industries. We all know, at least people from the social economy side, that social economy is very much present in these ecosystems. So what we are also trying to do is really build the interlinkages to show the ability and the let's say the complexity of social economy, its ecosystem, and the interlinkages with other ecosystems. So I hope that is a quite understandable introduction. What we will show right now is two examples of specifically disrupted sectors or specifically disrupted types or forms. So I would maybe like to start with the social services, because I think that you are less aware about the social service sector, which is today represented by Thomas Bignal from the European Association for Social Services for People with Disabilities. So it's very specific, it's targeting people with disabilities. He will explain immediately what kind of organization and enterprises. Some are working, for example, with more government money to have a certain service instead of the government. Others are also have full economic activities to fund these kind of actions. Some are also real full-fledged enterprises, like the work integration social enterprises we have discussed already a few times. So I think that's enough for me. So I would like to hand over the floor to Thomas. I think he has a PowerPoint presentation. In case it's not working, I can also share it, but maybe you can try yourself first, Thomas.
Hello, thank you very much, Carol.
Thanks.
And also the Clusters Alliance for the invitation. I will try and share my presentation. Can you see it now?
Yeah,
Yes.
works.
Great, so I will just come back. So yes, hello, good morning, everyone. So I work for the European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities. So we focus on social services for let's say, a more specific target group of individuals. But my presentation will, I think, be broader than that, and will focus on the social services as a whole, so covering also support for elderly people, for children, homeless people, migrants, etc. And we, of course, work a lot together as a whole, but even more so during this COVID period. So in social services, I would divide it to a certain extent into two groups. Of course, there's many more in between it. But on the first hand, we have what we can call social care and support services, which brings together all the types of support services that help people in a day-to-day lives to be active, to be healthy, to take part in the community. It can also be even basic or considered basic elements such as being fed, being clothed, being cleaned, etc., or being housed for these individuals. So that's what's important here in terms of the social care and support services is the continuity of the service, meaning that let's say people with disabilities, if they don't get that social care and support every day, then that of course hinders extremely sometimes the quality of their life, or even their life as a whole. And the same can be said for older people, for example. Of course, there can be an overlap between family carers, so people in the family who look after their loved ones who have care needs, but often there's, let's say, both let's say formal and informal support that is being provided. And of course, there's a broad variety of different types of services. So this needs to be, the continuity here is important, and most of these care services rely primarily on public funding, just in order to guarantee that continuity. Then on the other hand, you also have social enterprises / more from the approach of work integration enterprises. So services that primarily, let's say, they provide products or services, but the objective is also to employ disadvantaged workers or workers who are excluded from the labour market. And these types of products and services that are created is extremely diverse. I think covers most parts of the economy. There can be hotels, restaurants, agri-farms, factories. So, for example, in Belgium here, you have there's a factory that puts together the Pringles, so the chips that you get to eat. Or it's a factory which employs primarily people with disabilities that sort of puts them all together. So different types of factories now, for example, during the COVID, many of them shifted to, for example, creating masks, ventilators, etc. You also have laundry services, gardening services, so all types of enterprise who, of course, provide services to the local community, but also primarily aim to employ people with disabilities. What you see also more and more is, of course, both the social care services and the social enterprises primarily focused at the beginning in the past on, let's say, the target group, so people with disabilities. What you see more and more now is, of course, still supporting people with disabilities or older people or refugees and asylum seekers, but try to do so within mainstream types of enterprises, so either let's say local authorities or the education system, but also local businesses. And one of the ways this can be done, for example, is what's called supported employment, where experts help companies employ more persons with disabilities by giving advice, guidance, support, both to the individual who's employed, but also to the companies themselves. So that's a way how you can see also the interaction between these types of services and mainstream businesses. The social services sector in Europe, it's over 200,000 organizations. There's 3 main legal types, and this can depend a bit where you are in Europe. Generally, they are not-for-profit organizations. Also, quite often public and sometimes for-profit. The division divides is different where you are in Europe. For example, in Scandinavia, the public sector is much stronger. In Southern Europe, of course, non-for-profits are quite strong. If you look towards the UK, for example, for-profits are quite strong. But often even the for-profits do have a system of redistribution of money, for example, profit towards the social aim as well. Most of the companies are of SME size, so under, let's say, 250 or 500 employees, but it ranges very, very broadly. So it can be micro enterprises, 1 or 2 people, all the way to, for example, ONCE in Spain, who employs 70 to 80,000 people just in Spain, and I think around half of which are people with disabilities. And then if you look towards Germany, where you have Caritas Germany or Diakonie Germany, and they employ about 1 million people each, so huge enterprises. And of course, these are in Germany. It's not one single company, for example, not one single enterprise, but collectively they come together at national level under the same umbrella, and they employ 1 million people each. So it's huge. We employ about 11 million professionals, 5% of the total EU workforce. We also have millions of volunteers, and that most interestingly, despite, let's say, austerity, put simply, over the last 10 years, we also have a huge increase in jobs of 25% over the last decade, which also is linked to a very big increase in the demand for support. For example, more and more older people, but also more and more people, homeless people, people living in poverty, for example, needing help. We often talk about just the social impact of social services, and I think that's incredibly important. But I think we should also start looking at the economic return on investment a bit more, which is sometimes less direct than you would see in businesses, but actually also very, very important. So when you put money into, let's say, local social services, what happens? You see the social impact, of course, but you also see a triple impact on job creation, both jobs within the sector. I mentioned the 11 million workers earlier. And it's not just social workers, but you have more and more business professionals or people who have studied law or technology, because of course the sector is developing, the types of job profiles are also changing a lot as well. As a sector, we also help disadvantaged persons onto the labour market, and we also help to provide, by providing formal care, we help to give a few more choices to family carers, for example, and this is very often women, to have more work-life balance and more choices to be able to potentially work if they choose to. Without formal services, you see often higher amounts of women who are inactive, generally speaking. But also a lot of the time when you invest in social services, and Cathal mentioned it earlier, the money stays within the local community. So it would be local authorities who would finance local social services, and 80% of those expenses of social services on average is on local staff costs, who, of course, the staff costs for staff, who would then spend, again, mostly within the community in the local businesses that exist. And the remaining 20% is also often going towards local community enterprises as well. So you see that when money also goes into the local organizations, the money usually stays there and is then redistributed within the towns. And what we see, we have social services in every single sort of town and area across Europe, from, let's say, the biggest cities to the most rural of villages. And we also help companies to be more inclusive. There's a slight typo there, through, for example, supported employment agencies. So there's quite a big return on investment. There's a lot of evidence at national level, but we haven't, I think, seen to date, let's say, a major study at European level on this return on investment, and that's something which we should, I think, explore. So the impact of COVID, and I'm trying to speed up a bit. Residential care facilities have generally remained active, and what we've seen is, of course, a huge proportion of deaths and infection rates, primarily in care homes for the elderly, where we see 20 to 60% of total deaths in Europe due to COVID in those areas, which is, of course, extremely, or both sad, but also worrying, and a consequence of, I think, undervaluing this sector in the past as well. We see a lot of home care provision, which has been significantly reduced. Also, other forms of non-residential support, so the daycare, respite care, workshops, social enterprises have been primarily closed and or shifted online. But of course, it's not always exactly the same. We've also seen new forms of services being provided, more digitalized services like many enterprises. Food delivery, medical, psychological support have all been created a lot, but what we see is huge closures of services, but also quite a big increase in demand in the residential care facilities, which has put a lot of pressure there. This is just in the disability field, so not on, let's say, for elderly or for childcare, etc. But what we see in April 2020, so already 2 months ago now, quite a big increase in demand and access to PPE, where there's insufficient amounts there. So I'm trying to shift away around something. Significantly extra hours of workers, and we had staff shortages before the crisis. And of course, when you have a big increase in staff hours, but you don't have enough staff, that creates huge challenges. And you can see up to 50%, up to 50% of countries, we see income decrease of many providers, and that can be because of less public support, because providers are not fulfilling their contracts as was pre-agreed in the same way because of COVID. Yes, and therefore they have received less income. Sometimes care providers are linked to social enterprises, and when the social enterprises' income is decreased, then of course that decreases the overwhelming, the funding of the social care provider. but also there's a lot of less charity, which is done where people are primarily donating to hospitals and the healthcare sector and taking away much needed money from, let's say, social care providers as well. So huge income decrease. And then we see on top of that, in 24, I think 23% of countries, we see very much unstable income. So where the money has not been guaranteed, for example, by the public authorities. So we have increase in costs, primarily linked to PPE, extra hours, also digitalization. But we see income decrease or instability in the significant majority of providers. And here we see what's closed and what has opened. So a lot of organizations has been closed, and that comes with a decrease in income. And here is just one example, for example, where it is a social service provider, but also social enterprise in Austria. And they have a housing facility which has been significantly increased costs. So here we have an example for 20 users, but they have thousands of people who they are supporting. So if you multiply this by thousands of people, it comes to very expensive as well. And you have increased costs in, for example, social enterprises and other of about 10%, which has been unmet. And Austria is also one of the countries which is, let's say, supporting social enterprises probably the best in Europe today. So this is an example of the types of costs which are. There's also many other examples which we have here, which are not being met at the moment, and that is hugely worrying. So that's it for me, and sorry if I went a bit too over my time limit. Thank you.
It has been extremely interesting. Tomás, would you share with us both your presentation from today and also the report?
Yes, absolutely.
That would be wonderful. Thank you very much. So now, Suzanne, welcome, and the floor is yours. Should I give you the presentation rights? We are not hearing you. We are not hearing you.
Please do so.
Now,
I'll try to
now it's perfect. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, Thomas, because this is a really interesting presentation, and would love to learn more about what you are doing. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we are seeing it.
Perfect. Then we can start. Yeah, thank you again, Thomas. I see many parallels with our work, several parallels and challenges, and but also in opportunities. So this following might resonate a little bit with you. Good morning. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be here. And Karel has talked a lot about the Cluster Alliance. And thank you for inviting me, for inviting Euclid Network. I see a lot of you are working from home background. So, today I address you from my home in Haarlem, the Netherlands. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Susanne. I lead the Euclid Network, European Network for Social Enterprises and Impact-Driven Leaders. So I think a change way of working may be especially true for social enterprises in Europe. And today, those within our network and the wider social enterprise sector, they're working tirelessly to create positive impact for the various communities affected by COVID-19, really being at the forefront, swiftly changing gears to tackle the unforeseen challenges that this crisis has created, but with innovative solutions. So in the coming 10 minutes, I will present you some insights on the disruptions of the social economy ecosystem, and also on, I will present you with a case on how a cluster works, how a social economy cluster works. Now, before I do so, Karel has asked me to introduce our network. And I will gladly share with you a little bit about what our members and who our members are supporting. So Euclid Network, for more than a decade, has been shaping the future of the world's economy through our work with social enterprises and impact leaders. Our mission is to create a global reality where businesses make decisions, not just built on profit, but instead on social and environmental impact of their services. So what we envision is a world where social economy is the standard rather than the exception, and everything we do stems from this vision. Now, our members and partners are based in Europe. We're focused on Europe, but we're also including our neighboring countries. So that means Russia, the MENA region, and beyond. And together with our members, we undertake projects, advocacy, partnerships focused on developing and growing a diverse and collaborative network of social impact practitioners that are exactly addressing these 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what is really important to highlight is that our members are very diverse. So what is something that binds them is that they're all focused towards creating impact, supporting social enterprises. Social enterprises come in many different shapes and forms, and they really range from civil society and NGOs to for-profit businesses that make social impact. And our members really consist of a different set of university networks, incubators, and I'd like to tell you a little bit more about that. So if you look at this slide, the first thing you see that our members are spread around Europe. So it's very difficult to talk about a social entrepreneur, because a social entrepreneur in the UK or Ireland is very different from a social enterprise in Turkey, for example, or Russia. They're active in over 20 countries, but one common goal, boosting social entrepreneurship. And the types of organizations, as you may see in the diagram below, most of them are national social enterprise networks. So we're talking about Social Enterprise Netherlands, Social Enterprise Germany, Social Enterprise Ireland. But there are also incubators, universities that are researching social entrepreneurship, researching impact measurements, for example, and NGOs. And some of them are even social funds, because some of the national networks or incubators are also becoming social funds. They're taking this in-house. On this next slide, the reason why I wanted to show you this is because I wanted to show you how our members are supporting social enterprise. So the activities that they do and what they are boosting is networking mostly, capacity building, training, mentoring, some of them also funding, partly advocacy, and also research. And also what we do, what do they do? What do they support? What topics are they most interested in? So you see that poverty reduction is largely represented, education, but also gender equality, health, migration, climate action. And in the second paragraph, you see that typically they will focus on all types of growth stages. So it can be enterprises that are relatively small. For example, currently there's this social enterprise called Rafts, and they pivoted their business model, now making face masks with refugees. But we also have companies that are a little bit larger, like Fairphone, for example, or these types of businesses that might be looking also to internationalize and scale. But mostly we'll be looking at organizations, social enterprises that are focused locally and local economy wise. Okay, if we go to the next slide, I want to talk to you a little bit more about the disruptions in the social economy ecosystem. I think, as the European Commissioner Nicolas Schmit mentioned earlier this month, and what Thomas also stressed, is that COVID-19 has had a major impact on the social economy actors. And what Thomas also mentioned is they feel left behind, and this is certainly the case for social enterprises. So the social enterprises in our network, they report an average of 70% loss in income. Of course, bills keep coming in, we have rent, salaries, and the space for public funding is also shrinking as governments are redirecting funds to fight against COVID-19 and to put these funds into healthcare. But at the same time, a lot of these social enterprises are directly addressing the crisis in different ways, from producing health equipment, as just mentioned, developing digital work, online education, assisting mentally ill or those that are lonely, help in shopping, etc. And really, therefore, showing their resilience and adaptability. And this is something I'm coming back to a little bit later in my presentation. So social economy actors are really helping to cushion the impact of the crisis in different ways. And before going into why social enterprises and why social economy is currently of added value to the more traditional organizations, particularly in a cluster case I would like to present to you, concluding my presentation, I want to shortly address current challenges. And of course, there are plenty, but I'll mention 4. And the main challenges currently for the social economy are cash flow issues. So 3 out of 5 has difficulties to make it to the end of the year even. There's a significant reduction in activities because of restriction on movement. They need to adjust their services and products to the current status quo. And to conclude is that a lot of social enterprises are critical in inclusive economy. So they're providing services to support hiring unemployed people, but also getting youth and women and disabled included in the economy. And with the estimated unemployed, this will be a major challenge moving forward. So social enterprises are hit hard, and as they often work with the most vulnerable in our society, this is really worrying. But we think this crisis also reveals the true nature of the social enterprise and its added value towards the more traditional organizations and other types of organizations. So if we talk about crisis as an accelerator for social change, we see that globally social entrepreneurs are really catalysts for social change. They're really quick to see what's wrong in the world, what is lacking in the world, and they've been key players in bringing these necessary change. So social entrepreneurs have been the de facto social net in many emerging economies up till now. So where they have been aware of systematic inequalities that have been existed for decades, the emergence of coronavirus has made these inequalities also clearer now for the rest of the world to see. And the situation has presented the world with a new look at how certain groups are exposed to the health crisis, food shortages, job insecurity, and many more. And also becoming increasingly clear outside the social enterprise sector that impact entrepreneurs and companies are really needed in this space. And crisis has always been a way of empowering this change. So historically, economic downfalls have paved the way for social entrepreneurship. And the social impact sector is typically understood to grow during times where the economy as a whole begins to slow down. Even if you look at past crises, the 2008 crisis, social entrepreneurs are really additionally aware of the social losses brought on by these periods of economic disruption. So in this short time, since coronavirus has made its appearance, social enterprises have really swept in to pick up some of the pieces. And one of the examples that I wanted to give you is that a while ago, I believe already in March, right at the beginning, there was a hackathon organized by Social Enterprise Network Germany, calling on social entrepreneurs, programmers, designers, and others to really submit new solutions to the corona crisis. And over 40,000 participants worked for 2 days and generated 2,000 new ideas. So this is to show you a little bit more about the innovative character of social entrepreneurship. Now, getting into the added value of social enterprises. So how exactly can social enterprises be a great partner to traditional organizations? And we believe really that this is based on 3 characteristics of social enterprises. So one of them is their products are based on innovation. And entrepreneurs are really keen to act and react to economic changes. And we think much innovation comes out of these types of periods of recession. One of our partners, Social Enterprise UK, they reported that social enterprises in the country outperformed the private sector in adapting their business model. So what happens is that social enterprises and social innovations are always taken into account the complexity of social problems, and they need to really adapt to solutions, resilient enough to adapt and to survive. And when you put constraints around a situation, creativity actually goes up because you're trying to innovate within a limited space. The second characteristic is that businesses, social businesses, are quite resilient. Their organizations are resilient. So a lot of businesses, organizations are thriving in spite of these challenges presented by the pandemic. And we see that the common thread around these organizations that are weathering the storm, that they are authentic and they have an integrated commitment to their purpose rather than to their profit or growth. So during the financial crisis back in 2008, significantly more social enterprises survived than other business models, because they're based on solidarity. They're often rooted in local communities, and as mentioned, they're innovative. So we see that they have the ability to adapt to the current situation. And as social entrepreneurs and their community partners, they've been working for years to solve the market failures and demonstrate more sustainable and inclusive business models. The third characteristic is that they have impact-driven employees, and they're really, building on purpose. So you have a huge level of commitment from the employees to the organization. And what else is that they're great ambassadors of an inclusive organization. This is something that can also relate to the more traditional organization, and social entrepreneurs can form really a best practice for these other types of organizations. And social enterprises have an extra tool, and that is that their employees have a unique understanding of the local community and their supporters in general. This can really be a great asset. So if we look at how all this comes together in the current situation, so in the momentum, I would like to share with you a case of Impact City, The Hague. And we can talk a little bit more on how all of these different actors can really play a good role together in a cluster and create a social economic cluster. So Impact City, this is an initiative of the city of The Hague. They're developing a cluster for impact-driven organizations, social enterprises, and creating a unique hub in that sense. So what type of social enterprises are they supporting? Just a quick run about what they believe social enterprise is. So they see examples such as drones used in emergency situations. Affordable biogas systems in emerging countries, smartphone apps for mobile water management, but also power plants. And these types of organizations have three things in common. They're tech innovations with an international impact. They contribute to global challenges, and they're developed by startups that are based in The Hague. So the region and the startups or scale-ups being local, this is very important for Impact City. So their focus is on entrepreneurs with an international impact. And seeing that The Hague in the Netherlands, they have a strong history of addressing global challenges. It's the International City of Peace and Justice. It's a mix of corporations, NGOs, government organizations, engaging in social issues. So the areas they're supporting is climate, humanitarian aid, food innovation, sustainable energy. And this is also part of the reason why our network, Euclid Network, moved from London a few years ago and landed in The Hague, also due to Brexit. So the city of The Hague has invested 6 million euros in this cluster, Impact City. Some of the competitors they see is, for example, San Francisco, London, and what is more is that this cluster is a part of the economic department. So it's mainly focused towards job creation in the city. Now they have 5 pillars I wanted to share with you where they base this clusters on. So the first one is profile and visibility. So they're creating a strong profile of the socio-economic cluster in the city. And the next slide will show you a little bit more about who is in the cluster. They created this diagram showing all of the different actors, even adding to this on a monthly basis as the ecosystem is growing. So they feel like these are the several parties that are in this cluster. The second pillar is room for experiment. So it's all about cluster innovation. They have open labs with universities, research centers, they create challenges, and they really believe in cluster crossover. So creative and IT startups, they're working together on international tribunals, for example, sharing data in very innovative ways. So really creating that synergy. The third one is that they're really big on networking and events. So there's a yearly event called Impact Fest. They have the Big Improvement Day. They attracted the Global Enterprise Summit in 2019, last year. They have a very innovative justice forum. So all of these events really add to building this ecosystem. The fourth one is capital. So they make sure that the startups and scale-ups, they're doing matchmaking with investors. So impact investors are also actually a large part of the ecosystem, and they find it really important that they're also attracted to this cluster. Also business angels, private investors, venture capital, it's all in there. The fifth and last one is infrastructure and regulation. So the city and Impact City, they're really encouraging doing good and doing business. That's their slogan. And they're assisting with all kinds of practical help. So if you're a startup wanting to move to The Hague, they will help you with startup hubs, financing, getting housing, really accommodating and fostering these types of innovation. So that's it from my side. I know within this limited time we touched on a few points, but I hope it was enough to give you a little bit of an idea about what is happening with social enterprises and what kind of role they could play in different types of clusters, and also the way in which the more traditional organizations could start working with them, and how it's added value to other organizations. So thank you very much.
You are really welcome, Susan. Thank you to you. And now it's time for open the floor to all the attendants and hear what are your comments, questions, new perspective. We have heard lot of inputs on what kind of disruptions you are suffering. I will focus, if possible, on those that are present to you now, most present to you now, okay? And also, I have another question. How can we be better prepared for a possible rebound? Okay, so what kind of disruptions could reappear in that case, and how can we improve our readiness for that? Okay. Anyway, somebody from the attendants would like to comment or question? The floor is open. I'm sure that there are questions.
Antonio, can I make a question to Karel? A very short question. Karel, what will, in your opinion, be the future support from the European Union to the social economy in terms of European funds?
It's a question to me, I guess. I'm Karel. Yeah, I think I can address that question. So first of all, it's quite important that to stress that the Commission is currently working on a social economy action plan, which is due for next year. So that will be a great milestone, but not the only one, because it's not that everything has to be operated in that action plan. A lot is already existing today. So we have different pure, if I look only at funding opportunities, different angles, and I always make the distinction between operating grants or subsidies, so money which is not investment, and investment capital. What is very important, and what you have seen in for example, the cluster example of Susanna, is that many social enterprises have very much difficulties to get easy access to investment capital. So to go to a regular bank to say, I have a business in X or Y, but I'm a social enterprise, so that means that I have no full shareholder return on investment, and I want to invest my profit in the social impact. And then a banker says, oh, I don't know that kind of type. I don't trust that kind of business. And they are very reluctant. So the interest rate will increase or they will just not give a loan. So this is one of the examples where the EU comes in with the easy fund, where it gives guarantees to banks to provide loans to enterprises and also in future, probably even equity. This is, of course, only capturing a part of the social economy because, for example, the examples that Thomas has given are, in my opinion, and maybe Thomas can come in if he doesn't agree, are less suffering from these kind of investments because this sector is de facto more related. It's like an arm of the state in some cases. They are non-profit, they are private, but often in public-private partnerships, they work with procurement, etc. So there is a business angle, but there is also a procurement angle for the government. So they are less suffering from such kind of issues. So that's one particular type of investment. This does not mean that the social enterprises are covered because this is only a pilot instrument. So I think we have to invest way more. It's not only providing these instruments, it's also raising awareness amongst traditional bankers that the social enterprise is also an enterprise. It's not because you're non-profit that you don't make profit. And that is always something I have to stress over and over again. It's what you do with the profit. If you reinvest it in the enterprise, that's what any other business does. If you reinvest it in social impact and less return on investment for your shareholder, if this is agreed upfront, there is actually no issue. It's just another business model. It's just another way of your financial construction. So we need to raise awareness, and that's particularly what we try to do with this ecosystem as well. This ecosystem reaches out to other ecosystems. Yesterday, we had a very interesting discussion about it to explain also to economists within the Commission how this very specific financial constructions might work and also be very trustful. Besides this, I think it's very important to also support, and again, I'm very happy that Susanna mentioned the Impact City, because Impact City is initiated by government, and I'm a big supporter of clusters that are bottom-up. So this is one that is supported by government, but it created a critical mass that really boosted it. These many, let's say, participants of the clusters are not invented by the government. They are all private. They are even investors from the business side. So it's extremely important to help fund the structure of such things, to make this governance possible, to make this critical mass possible. A few weeks ago, we had Rafaela, and she is also here. This is a bit another type of a social economy cluster, which is really started bottom up. They have also good relations with the government, but there the initiative really came from, I think, the university and a critical mass of let's say, civil society partners, associations, and organizations. So these are different ways, but I think it's very important to have like a support in subsidies, for example, with regional funds, structural funds, to make these kind of ecosystems very locally happen, because at this intersection where all these parties are brought together, that is just a strength of resilience. What we have been doing here in the ECA meeting shows every day again and again that the cluster, when you cooperate, when you have strong relationships before a crisis, that you are more resilient during a crisis. And I think that is the main task for the Commission in the future, to support social economy, but also to make them economically stronger, and also to build the ties between other actors and between other businesses, let's say, locally, really creating this local ecosystem. And you can, of course, have many other types of subsidy support, so for example, for digitization, for skills, etc., which are all more niche, let's say, grants, but this is the same for any other enterprise. Every enterprise needs support to develop the skills of its employees. Any other enterprise needs support to create its digital environment, etc., etc. So it's a quite long answer, but there are so many things that the Commission and that the European Union is already doing and can even do more. So and to end again, the social economy action plan can only boost, but I also trust that also from the economic side, and not only from the social economy pure side, that we also should bring bridges clearer to the real, not the real, but to other forms of enterprises, like the ones that are represented here today by clusters, because that can really create this economic resilience. This can make this economic resilience way more stronger than staying on an island, which is never good. So that's my long response to that. Sorry.
Excellent
Antonio,
response.
can I add something to this,
I have a
Marek?
question.
Marek.
Yeah, can I add just you know the whole story in regional development that we've been developing for last 10 years was about smart specialization and integrating all communities within regions to come up with development and investment from public funding with private funding together, and we were always saying about quadruple helix. So public administration, business, research, and civil society. And the civil society, with the experience I had, was always very neglected by governance, by businesses. So, you know, even if we focus on still there's an issue between collaboration between business and research, the civil society was always like, you know, like someone, I mean, nobody cares. Huh? And I think this is a great role as well at this very moment, and this is my appeal. At this very moment, we are just in front of the new financial perspective, and all regions have obligation to go through the smart specialization strategies reviews at regional level, involving in so-called entrepreneurial discovery process, meaning that all from the people from quadruple helix should be involved in developing what priorities the regions should invest in. And I know from evidence, experience, and so on that people are saying that the civil society and now social enterprise definitely are not involved in this process. And very often they don't know even that they can be involved in the process. What we are preaching from the EU at regional level, that they must be involved in the process. So you have, at least from the EU, European Regional Development Fund, European Social Fund, the big legitimacy to go to regional authorities in your region saying, listen guys, we are having, you are developing smart specialization strategies. This is about bringing all actors on board in order to set priorities for the further investments. And you are legitimized from the European Commission point of view to do so. And this is put in the regulation, this is put everywhere in order you to be involved in this process. And I think the main problem is that even the civil society or representative like yours are not even aware that they are allowed to do so. So it's not about being allowed, it's simply you should be involved in this process. If you are not involved in this process, then it's something wrong in the governance at the regional level that they are not involving you. I wanted to make this plea because it's not a pleasure to have you, it's obligation to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very, very important, Marek. Thank you for sharing. Alberto Pecci.
Yes, thanks, Antonio. I have a very question for, taking advantage with the specialists on social enterprise and especially Thomas and Suzanne. Early this week, with some of the people who are here, discussion around the concept of share value and how to apply it. I would like to know if the people that are in social enterprise, part of Carl, that I know he is already well know the concept, are aware of this concept, are using it, are considering it, because I think it's really a good bridging between social economy and the market through the class, probably. So what's just having the view about if they know and are thinking applying this concept?
That's a question for you, Thomas, Suzanne, whoever wants to answer.
Suzanne, go first.
Yeah, so Albert was cutting out a little bit. Could you rephrase the question?
If you are new and you are considering the concept of share value that was used by Porter and Kramer 9 years ago, and that, well, from clusters, we are advanced a bit on that, but I think it's really a good bridging social economy and market.
Yeah, I agree that that is definitely a path that should be looked into. For me personally, I'm not an expert on that matter, but if that's a way how we can create mutual interest between these two types of organization, then I think, especially in the UK, they're also looking into the possibilities of that, and this is working. But perhaps Thomas, you have a clear view on that.
Yes, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I had to change my microphone. Yes, I mean, firstly, I think it's important to differentiate social economy and mainstream businesses, meaning that a business with a social, let's say a normal business with a corporate social responsibility, that's extremely important, but it's not the same as a social economy enterprise. And there's different reasons for that, which I come in later. That being said, it's very clear, at least to us, that we cannot solve the social issues that exist without mainstream businesses playing a much bigger role. If anything, I think the main objective of our types of organizations is that we don't have to exist if the mainstream stakeholders do the job themselves to a certain extent. I'm not so much talking about, for example, the care types of services, but more about employment types of services, for example. And therefore, that's partly why, because mainstream employment, open labor market employment, is in theory and in practice better than, let's say, segregated forms of employment or sheltered or protected settings for everyone involved. That's why what we see as a trend within our types of services is more and more openness to work with companies to make sure that companies are reassured, are supported, have the right let's say, for example, tax subsidies or other types of policies, state aid, for example, that can help companies employ more people with disabilities. Because I don't think that as, let's say, specialized support providers, we could do the job as effectively on our own. So whereas I would differentiate, let's say, social economy enterprises from businesses with strong CSRs, and I think that's also important, ultimately, the future direction is for businesses to be more inclusive. And I think that's where the concept of that you talk about of shared value, which I've looked about a bit in the past, is increasingly important. And I think what we see in our experience and in my experience is that it works. Many of our members who work with businesses to, for example, to increase their employment opportunities of people with disabilities. So I was speaking yesterday to a job coach whose job is to go to local companies in Flanders and say, do you want to employ more people with disabilities? They say yes, they say no. It's important to be frank. If they say yes, then it's about trying to understand how that can be done, but without being, you know, idealistic or whatever. A company still has to make profit to a certain extent, even in the statutes. So it's about sort of showing how it can be done and having a very frank and open discussion on how that can be done. But that can't be done if companies don't have make a stronger effort to employ more people with disabilities. So effectively, I think the concept of shared value is increasingly important. But I also think that that also pushes the trends in our field to work more and more with companies who have those values and have those principles. So I hope this is relevant for you.
Thank you very much. We are nearing the closing of the session. My feeling is that we have only scrapped the surface. We need to speak a lot more on what are your difficulties at this moment and how can we together help you to solve or afford them in a better way. Okay, so I am sure that we need to work more on this. Next Tuesday we are going to have another session. It's about the social economic canvas. We will have Alexandro Rancati from the EU Policy Lab presenting it, and you are all invited to participate also. Anyway, we are also we are thinking on another session with Alberto Pezzi to speak about shared value. Very important, and we will keep you posted anyway. As I said, we need to better understand what is your reality. So I don't know. We perhaps we could think about the possibility to have a specific session in another format, going deep in your difficulty, in the disruptions and the possible solutions, because it's a serious matter for everyone, and the situation is urgent because we need to be prepared for possible rebounds. And so we will keep in contact. Ilaria.
Hi, Ilaria from Italy. Hello, everyone. I have a little question for Alberto Pezzi. Ciao, Alberto. Can we say, are we able to say that companies or clusters with the approach of shared value are really more resilient comparing to those companies not based on this approach?
Hello, Hilaria. There are the problem of metrics on how the share value is created, especially on the impact of the society. It's the ones that is more difficult. There is some effort that, for instance, the B Corp movement that is starting to trying to really evaluate what is this impact, the social impact on a company, but still it's really not very well known and not so diffused. And this is in fact is one of the obstacle, the shortcomings of share value that up to now. On the side of benefits, of course, is much more easy because it's a number and it's there. But I think it's since it's really something that is improving, and especially in this post-corona crisis, it will be very much important to also from the public side at all levels to invest in initiative projects that are really this double value of creating social impact and at the same time being sustainable for companies because they continue to create benefits and incomes.
Perfect. We will speak more about it. Ula, would you have some last comment?
No, just very briefly, because I really think this is exactly what we are looking for, to see and how we can bring the synergies, the potential of social economies and nature, how cluster work. I think this is a very good recipe, and we need to find, let's say, also more practical ways how to bring them together and to translate it then into what can we do with a financial perspective and concrete programs. So I think, as you said, Antonio, we were scratching the surface, but we see the potential is there, and we need to look for opportunities to dig deeper. Thanks a lot to everybody.
Thank you. So, see you soon, I hope. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you everybody for the invitation. Very interesting.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
Bye-bye.